Hare Krishna. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutle Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. My name is Tapan Mishra Das and I serve at the ISKCON Ministry of Education, where we are currently conducting several discussions with ISKCON leaders around the world to find out from them how Srila Prabhupada's books are the basis. Today it is our good fortune and privilege to invite for this discussion His Grace Govardhan Prabhu. Hare Krishna Govardhan Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Tapan Mishra Prabhu.
His Grace Govardhan Prabhu has many jewels on his chest, badges, etc. A few that I like to mention to introduce him to our viewers is Prabhu is a ISKCON GBC secretary, and he's currently overseeing several countries in Africa in his responsibility as a GBC member, which is the highest position in ISKCON. Besides that, Prabhu is responsible for as an international trustee for the BBT worldwide. He's deeply involved in publishing books and distributing books, and he's also been a pillar behind the South African community, Yatra, and establishing BBT in Africa. Govardhan Prabhu, welcome.
Hare Krishna Tapan Mishra Prabhu. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Prabhu, please take us through this journey and share with us how did you first encounter Srila Prabhupada's books?
Yes, thank you. Well, thank you first for the opportunity, for establishing this opportunity for an important platform, an important dialogue. And we can spend some dedicated time. We can pause and reflect on Srila Prabhupada's words in his books. Of course, when I first was introduced to Srila Prabhupada's books, it was quite an unusual way. There was a Harinam party in my hometown. And, I was a young man, 16 years old, a born-again Christian, I think, very much a born-again Christian. So I wanted to save these people who were jumping and singing in the street. So I had gone to the devotee to have a word with him. But the devotee, being very experienced, he just handed me a book, So listen, we have no time to speak, but please take this book. And that was my encounter with Srila Prabhupada's book. Yes, in a Harinam party.
And it seems like your very first encounter with ISKCON was in the form of Kirtan and Shravan, the first steps of devotional life.
By Krishna's grace, yes, by Krishna's grace. By Krishna's grace. Yeah. I was 16 years old at that time, 1982 it was. So a very arrogant and somewhat, when I met the devotees doing the Harinam, I was very, very reluctant, very hesitant, very loath, and somewhat very dismissive of what these people were doing, But when I got that book, this devotee gave me that book, I kind of felt a magnetic connection with that book and took the book very quickly and put it under my jacket. And
what book was it, Prabhu? Would you remember?
It was The Science of Self-Realization. That picture with Srila Prabhupada with his chadar over him. Yeah?
Yes.
So I put it under my jacket and walked home about 30 minutes away. Went into my bedroom, locked the door up, and read the first 60 pages of that book. And by the next morning, I had become a vegetarian. Everything I was looking for was in just those 60 pages of that book. Very powerful book, Science of Self-Realization.
It is one of the primary books we all have read and relished and nurtured our Krishna consciousness with. Prabhu, you mentioned that you were almost like a born-again Christian. What inspired you to actually open that book and read it?
Well, there was something about the book, and there was something about these devotees who was giving that book. There was something very sincere. Firstly, he acknowledged that I was antagonistic. So secondly, as a gesture of goodwill, he's given me a gift. So to reciprocate the gift, I took the gift. Now, what would I do with the book? Well, the picture on the front cover of Prabhupada looking very serene, wise, there's no way I could not have opened that book. Today, we read now, Srila Prabhupada says, you associate with me by reading my books, or if you read my book seriously, everything would be revealed. Many years later now, when I read these statements of Srila Prabhupada, I can fully appreciate those words. It's a very powerful statement, and I'm a living testimony to that kind of kindness of the devotees.
You mentioned that you became a vegetarian overnight. So definitely there must be some message about not eating meat and not killing animals. Is there something else you remember from that very first reading of the 60 page, something that stood out and inspired you to make that overnight change in your life?
Yeah, Srila Prabhupada is speaking there to a cardinal who's speaking about thou shalt not kill. And here Srila Prabhupada's answers were, and he's, so clear and lucid that one cannot objectively object to what Srila Prabhupada is saying. And you could see that wisdom that the persons he was speaking to had also had no appropriate response to Srila Prabhupada's arguments. And therefore, I was totally convinced. I actually wanted to find this person on the cover of that book, but it was 1982. Srila Prabhupada had left this world by then. Yes.
But it seems you're still living in the memory of the first day. It's been many years now, 38 years since then? And Prabhu, how has the reading of Srila Prabhupada's books impacted your life over the last 38 years, and especially your spiritual life?
Let me just say upfront that I may not be the best example of somebody who worships Srila Prabhupada's books by reading to the intensity that we should. But Srila Prabhupada did say that regularly reading his book at least twice a day, that's what he recommended. And by reading, daily knowledge will be revealed, Srila Prabhupada said. And if we read Bhagavatam, read a verse a day, it'll take us 50 years. If we read Bhagavad Gita, a verse a day, it'll take us 2 years. So my insignificant self, I feel a great sense of hope, a great sense of connection to Srila Prabhupada's books. And we all need inspiration, we all need motivation. There's a saying that hope frequents the poor man's hut and the rich man's palace. So where we all are, we share a kind of commonality, how a most insignificant person like myself can be exposed or given this treasure house of knowledge that changes the way you think, what you eat, what you do, the way you act. It fills your day, it guides your day, and effectively guides your whole life. So by reading Srila Prabhupada's words, I feel there's so many surgical arguments, incisive commentary. You feel like you're on the winning side. You want to be on the winning side. Everyone wants to be on the winning side. You want to be on the side of the strongest person. So with Srila Prabhupada's books, I feel like that, His heart is filled with hope and confidence for a better future. And Srila Prabhupada, for me personally, is a very unique source of inspiration. Because in the confrontation of daily life, so many things occur on a daily basis. That transcendental knowledge, some or the other, gives us direction and cushions us, from what we call Maya, things that tend to intrude our sacred space. So Srila Prabhupada's words, those sacred words are necessary. For me, I feel has been tremendously useful for all these years. That's why every day without fail, as part of my sadhana, I must and should and will always read. As much as I chant my rounds or observe a fast on a holy day, try my best never to miss reading Srila Prabhupada's books, yes.
Well, that's very inspiring to hear. And Prabhu, has this been your sadhana recently, or has this been a sadhana that you've practiced for a long time now?
Yeah, I've been doing it for a very long time. I try and make sure, as I said, I'm not the best example of committing to it, but most certainly the gratitude I have in my heart for what Srila Prabhupada has given me motivates me also to take time every day to read something. And if I don't, I do feel somewhat incomplete. I feel that I've missed my rounds or something. So I try to keep it as disciplined as that, yes.
Well, we wish that every leader thought and conducted the sadhana the way you speak, because it's very inspiring. We often feel in our life with so many things to do, so many services to perform. Not many may prioritize in today's time and age the daily readings. So thank you for that, Prabhu. Thank you for sharing that part of your life with us. You also mentioned earlier on that Srila Prabhupada lives uh, forever in his books, and he's present through his books. Did you yourself have any personal encounter or realization where Prabhupada was speaking to you directly through his books?
That statement that Srila Prabhupada lives forever in his books is so factual. It really is very, very factual. In 1973, the devotees asked Srila Prabhupada in Los Angeles, when you are not present with us, how is it possible to receive your instructions? And Srila Prabhupada responded, well, all the answers are in my books. There is nothing to be said, nothing to be said. Whatever I had to say, I've said in my books. So, how must one try and understand what Srila Prabhupada is saying here, that is always present in his books? Srila Prabhupada built a house in ISKCON, which we all live very comfortably. We take so much of spiritual nutrition every day. Prabhupada created the BBT in 1972. And he said, for the next 10,000 years, these books are the law books of mankind. That's a very weighty statement. Of course, if you look at it, somebody on the planet receives Srila Prabhupada's books every 3 seconds. That's quite
Wow.
phenomenal, right? If you take the Jameson Bible, which has been distributed for at least 300 years, somebody receives a Jameson Bible every 1 second. So if you do the comparative, we're 50 years into existence, every 3 seconds, Jameson Bible every 1 second. There's something special about where Srila Prabhupada's books are headed. And not only Srila Prabhupada's books, he delivered 2,200 lectures, he had 1,300 conversations, 6,000. Prabhupada penned 6,000 letters. So these 70 volumes of books, together with everything Srila Prabhupada said and spoke about, they clearly form a repository, the canon, the reference point for devotees going forward. Therefore, they are most certainly, for us, Srila Prabhupada will forever live in his books. Now, on a personal level, do I have any realization about the statement that Srila Prabhupada made? Of course, I do. I realize it's true, what Srila Prabhupada said. Srila Prabhupada will forever live in his books. Srila Prabhupada would be the final arbiter on any matter of spiritual dispute. Now, 100 years from now, 200 years from now, he's the preeminent Siksha Guru. So his view is the only view that matters. So we have to know what his view is on any subject matter. So if we don't read, we may not be able to properly present Srila Prabhupada, or present what Prabhupada wanted. Our views are important. In this world, having a democracy is very important. But in a subject as serious, with so much gravity, like knowledge and take you back to Krishna's lotus feet, Srila Prabhupada's words is the only words that matters. Therefore, we have to know what he's saying. And on that basis, most certainly he lives forever in his books. That's my
Thank you.
realization.
Thank you, Prabhu. Prabhu, in this on this aspect where we are speaking to people, talking to people, and in some ways, if I use the phrase preaching, have you found reading to be as important as preaching? From your perspective, how do they talk to each other? And we often find situations where devotees may go out preach, but they're not reading enough. So with 4 decades of experience, what have you seen as the balance, and what happens if they don't read enough?
From whatever little preaching that I do, and it's an exercise of repetition. Srila Prabhupada, in a time capsule of 50 years, the issues that face the world, pretty much what Srila Prabhupada spoke and discussed. It's said in the Srimad Bhagavatam that if one reads Srimad Bhagavatam, he receives firm intelligence. But on our own, what can we read and what can we understand? It is Srila Prabhupada's, kind of like purport, his explanation, his narrative that we carry. So, for the purposes of preaching, I had found that people really appreciate things that I might say sometimes, and all it actually is, it's really what Prabhupada is saying. Because actual charity or dhanam means to award fearlessness and freedom to conditioned souls, right? So the heart of human society is full with this expectation of life, but they fail to see death standing next to them. Srila Prabhupada was so expert in all of those situations that he packaged all his thoughts and the themes. So it's so essential to hear his argument because his argument is invincible. If you simply repeat what he is saying, you will come out victorious every time. My personal realization is that there's so much of potency in the words that Srila Prabhupada transmits that I've never, have met anyone, that could present a cogent argument against Srila Prabhupada's arguments, which is why I love memorizing Srila Prabhupada's arguments, analyzing it, trying to, at my age, keep it in my mind, and as often as possible, go back and read and reread it. I find it very useful.
Well, it is mentioned often that we should look at the world as you're describing through the eyes of the scriptures, through Shastra Chakshu. Prabhu, any examples from your own life, how this might look like and where it helped you from getting dragged into a nasty situation? You just described about victorious situations, but how does it appear to be looking at the world through the scriptures, Srimad Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, and Bhagavad Gita of
Yeah.
Srila Prabhupada?
Well, we're actually looking through Srila Prabhupada's eyes, right? Because the scriptures are there, but the possibility of actually understanding them, crystallizing them on our own, it's not really possible. See, it's Srila Prabhupada's eyes through which we're looking at these scriptures. I know for myself that without Srila Prabhupada's purpose, a lot of these complex topics in the Vedas, like Bhagavad Gita, if you look at Bhagavad Gita, there's so many versions of Bhagavad Gita. It's Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita, as it is, that's made millions of devotees, although there are so many translations of Bhagavad Gita. So for me personally, had I not had the opportunity to read Srila Prabhupada's words and seeing what the scripture is saying through his eyes. For example, the Shastra says that, as a human being, you have the most coveted position because you have intellect, you have intelligence, you have reason, you have cognitive ability. The human instrumentation is so sharp that it must be meant for a higher purpose. It cannot be meant for some base activity. You wouldn't overload your effort to achieve something. Krishna is given this human form of birth, and Prabhupada is constantly in his books emphasizing this. So my realization is that had it not been for Srila Prabhupada, that's just my personal realization. My DNA and my makeup is that I would have been chasing for accumulation, and I would have been, just moving in a direction that even when I'm 90, I would still be chasing and trying to accumulate, etc. Now, I have a little bit of knowledge to Srila Prabhupada's mercy. We have a better line of sight. Yet when you reach 50, old age lingers around for a long time. It's a mascot to death. So you stop and pause, and now you invest heavily because you've reached the final mile. Had it not been for Srila Prabhupada, we've not been able to see life like that. Life would be to the last breath, chasing
I think
something.
we'll all will be dead on the track, as they call it, right, while running.
Yeah. And, the thing is, as simplistic as that sounds, it's just amazing. Like I see a lot of my friends who are at university and who are academics and scholars. Their objective and purpose in life. We came out of the same school. We're friends for a lifetime, but it's very different to the way we see things. Simply because we have the benefit of Srila Prabhupada's wisdom. So I'm very appreciative for that.
Oh, it is. It is. I mean, it's when people say it saved our lives, it's for this reason that we all feel it saved our lives. Not that
Yes.
any one of us were dying per se. Some of us did, but others weren't. But I think it's that deeper essence that you just brought out, which helps us realize the statement, what life would have been otherwise. Prabhu, so far you've very kindly shared with us reflections on a personal front of how Srila Prabhupada's books have helped you individually in your life. I want to change tracks a little bit and move to the track of ISKCON as a society, our communities, and what role does reading books every day, how should the devotees and the leaders specifically conduct themselves in relationship to the book to take this movement forward together? Some reflections on that, please.
Yeah, ISKCON is a sacred institution. Sacred institution. It's meant to convey a very important message to society. So in the makeup of ISKCON, the way it's constituted and structured by Srila Prabhupada, it's designed for that purpose. You'd be interested to know there's a famous sociologist, Rosabeth Kanter. She did research on 91 new religious movements in the 19th century. And the finding was that hardly 12 of those religious institutions that she researched survived 25 years. Now,
Right.
ISKCON is gone past 50 years. So clearly, ISKCON is destined to cause a shift in human thinking. And we can be part of that shift, that movement, that history. Srila Prabhupada's books are the foundation of that shift. Because really speaking, his books find their way into every person's home. So they're navigational in that sense. And Srila Prabhupada sets the tone, he sets the compass, the speed, and he insulates his movement. So he set the movement, he set up the BBT. Without knowing what's in these books, we wouldn't know what Srila Prabhupada wanted. So it's not possible to manage anything. How would you possibly manage having not read Prabhupada's books? It's not possible. So I think the importance of reading Srila Prabhupada's books to ISKCON and ISKCON leaders come from the fact that we're dealing with a very sacred entity. Firstly, passed on from one generation to the other. Secondly, in so many languages of the world. And the books is really the foundational basis of that. Without the books, persons may not, as Prabhupada said, what did our few minutes of preaching do? It's the book on the shelf that somebody picks up one day and gets to learn about this great movement called ISKCON. So the leaders, I believe, have a very important role to play to encourage devotees to read, to understand what Srila Prabhupada, because it creates a certain sense of unity, right? If we all read what Srila Prabhupada is saying, how would there be a dispute on some issues? It's Prabhupada is saying it. Nobody could
Yes.
take a superior position to Srila Prabhupada, or at least we hope not. So he's the default point. Yeah.
Prabhu, in your case, you also have the privilege of being a trustee of International PBT. What has your observation been in terms of the appreciation of people in general about Srila Prabhupada's books ever since Srila Prabhupada's departure from the material realm on this planet? Has it increased? What are the people out there saying, not amongst devotees, but people on the street? Is there something that you can share with us?
Yeah, just take an example close to home. I live here in Africa. I'm speaking to you now from Johannesburg.
Yes.
In Africa, there are 2,100 languages. It's a lot of languages, right? We
Yes.
have an African BBT that's been here now, very active for the last 10 years, busy with translation. Now, take a book like Bhagavad Gita as it is, a very foundational text. There are 10 million people in South Africa who speak isiZulu. isiZulu. So we are now at the 12th chapter of that particular book, translating it. But we have many devotees from that community. Now they have the books in their mother language, right? We see people who join, who become devotees through universities, etc. They study here in Johannesburg, and then they might go back to some faraway place in Africa. But there are people in remote parts of Africa who have taken the knowledge of Srila Prabhupada's books, very common people like myself, And the only connection they would have for their salvation is through Srila Prabhupada's books. So the books are very, very appreciated on multiple levels.
Prabhu,
Yes.
I want to ask you another question with respect to cultural shift or change in habits. Over the last 4 decades, at the time when you joined the movement, you came in touch with the books. What was it at that point in time? What was the mood that devotees had towards Prabhupada's books at that point in time? And over the years, has it changed? If yes, how?
Now, I'm a pretty unimportant person in the scheme of things, but I've somehow or the other have always been connected to book distribution. Firstly, because I love doing book distribution. Even today, we have the intensity of marathons in December. For
Yes.
example, here in South Africa, we would have a Ratha Yatra, which is the biggest Ratha Yatra outside of India. We'd normally have it in December. So many years ago, we changed it from December to April because December was Prabhupada's book marathon.
Yes.
So the leadership and the devotees and everyone are very conscious. And we have very specific targets every year. I have not seen, I was looking the other day from 1977 to now. It is a fact that we distributed more books then, but now we have more devotees. In South Africa, you have like almost 4,000 initiated devotees. And not everyone may be a book distributor, but most certainly when the marathons are there is an intensity. So there's always been that intensity for book distribution. We could do more, we should do more. Africa is a very impoverished continent. It's interesting, Srila Prabhupada gave an instruction when he came here, very unique instruction. He said that any books printed in African languages should be sold at cost. So in other words, whatever the print cost is, so BBT should make absolutely no markup on it. So Prabhupada really wanted his books to go out to the local people. And, I've seen many devotees, and, as time goes on, we get older, younger persons come, and you always find that kind of evangelistic spirit existing in the heart of a few devotees, and they tend to carry that to the next generation. And there seems to be something mystical about that, right? There's always somebody you'd find in the congregation who would stand up and really be counted for book distribution. So BBT Africa has across Africa what they call BBT ambassadors. Each country, they appoint an ambassador. They connect to the ambassador, share information, share the minutes of their meetings, even their operational meetings. So the person on the ground is like really inspired, maybe thousands of kilometers away, to do book distribution. So in that way, the spirit is always kept alive. I actually forgot what was your question. I got a bit detailed.
So you elaborated quite nicely about the distribution of books.
Yes.
I just want you to reflect a few minutes on the reading of Srila Prabhupada's books. So yes, books are going out. I want you to share with us what has your observation been in terms of the mood that the devotees have now versus over the years about reading Prabhupada's books, like the way you picked it up and overnight there was a change in your life. Do you see that the same spirit is continuing, or you see that there needs to be, it's dwindling, something else needs to be done to inspire devotees to read? Because Prabhupada himself, towards late 70s, he used to say, yes, you're distributing a lot of books, I'm very happy, but I want my disciples and followers to read my books. Correct. So if something you can share with us on that aspect.
The commitment to reading is a very personal commitment. It kind of stems from reading. After you've read, you realize this is an oceanic source of information and inspiration. So each person would have a different experience. But to give you a practical example, His Holiness Bhakti Chaitanya Maharaj is currently teaching Bhagavad Gita as part of Bhakti Shastri. There's 700 students on that who assemble every day, Monday to Friday, from 6 to 7 to hear Bhagavad Gita, verse by verse. That may be a sample of the enthusiasm that exists. So there most certainly is enthusiasm by devotees to read, but there's no way of quantifying that. And how do you know somebody is? There's not like a scorecard that you would fill or something. So, I'm not able to give a very precise answer whether devotees are reading, but most certainly you'll see that, in the practices of devotees, that when devotees become more advanced, They get to do more service, more enthusiasm for service. So that enthusiasm we see, and we can only take it's coming from the chanting and reading. But
Indeed.
I cannot say for sure to what extent that reading is going on. But we started, for example, when this lockdown started, we started a little BBT group for reading. We started with Bhagavad Gita, and we had like maybe 15 people, guests and devotees. It's a very safe space. We have different speakers. And throughout that whole time, every day, devotees pitched up and they thoroughly enjoyed it. Those who have read it, Bhagavad Gita before, reread it. Those who have never read it for the first time. So that's the special thing. Yeah.
You touched upon the scorecard. How do we measure it? We often talk about book distribution, how many books we've distributed. There is, as part of our sadhana, there is a certain number of rounds that everybody chants. What would your thoughts be if the leadership was to sort of contemplate on ways to encourage, monitor, and not in a sense of a police monitoring, but in the sense of encouraging everybody and keeping track of how they're progressing in reading Prabhupada's books? Would that make a difference and in the congregations and communities?
I think it would, because it's the spiritual master, when he gives initiation, wants the devotee to make rapid advancement. So we give the holy name. If at that time emphasis is placed for the devotee to commit to some reading, the spiritual master, that would help, I think. Because reading is now very much optional. It's very much optional. Of course, somebody would argue that the spiritual master of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was illiterate. Gaur Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj. So when he asked Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, you're reading the Chaitanya Bhagavat and Chaitanya Charitamrita. I don't read Sanskrit. Can you tell me what's in these books? And he responds, that whatever I've read, I see in your character and personality. So, so the potency of Krishna consciousness is not totally dependent on our own effort in reading, but most certainly because we are preaching society. We are an evangelistic outreach society. Every devotee is like Srila Prabhupada's representative, an agent, a proxy to effect a change. That's what makes it incumbent on us to read and know the philosophy and to be able to share it at ease. So if we don't read, we wouldn't be able to do that. So I feel there should be more organized efforts to try and encourage reading. Like take for example the education ministry. Now the education ministry is focusing on this very important aspect of reading. There was a saying by Emerson, he said that if we encounter a man with rare intellect, we should ask what books he's reading.
Yes.
Now, where we have encountered Srila Prabhupada, and through him we've encountered all of these previous acharyas. So we have a very unique privilege, what I call profitable reading. So we can give something to our children, give something to our family and friends. And generally devotees will say, well, a practical objection would be, I don't have enough time. So Krishna's time factor comes in. But if you have some kind of structure, globalized, decentralized kind of reading room in every country, in every city, on Zoom for 30 minutes or 45 minutes, you partner with the BBT divisions, create a kind of organized program. Srila Prabhupada's books are mainly for the devotees, as you say, And Srila Prabhupada is a representative from the spiritual world. He came he's the greatest ambassador of goodwill. And he is actually, as you said, he's actually given these books for us. And he comes in a line of unselfish servants who are agents of divine mercy. And he was on this life-changing expedition. So where we are, we have somehow or the other received this like a vaccine almost. So we got this vaccine. Yeah.
Shot in the arm.
Exactly.
Literally.
Yeah. It's like fire will act, Fire will act under the right circumstances. Books will act also. So we've got this vaccine. Each book is like a person. It's like a name card. It has somebody's name on it. So as we read them, we'll be inspired to share it. If we don't read it, we may not feel so inspired to share it. And the education ministries are impressing on us for our own reading, and telling us when we read, we allow Krishna to do his magic. The Sankirtan movement in this age is exactly that. The most important pen that has ever, if there ever was a pen or ever was a typewriter that delivered the most important message, it was Srila Prabhupada's. So taking 60 minutes a day or 30 minutes a day to some global program, these books are literally incarnations of Krishna. And they actually are our family business. You and I and all the devotees
Yes.
of Lord Chaitanya, it's our family business, right? So we need to understand it's confidential service. As our family business, we need to understand the product we have, or else how would we trade in it and give it and share it? And then we can be assured of the highest execution of bhakti and divine overflow of love through Srila Prabhupada's books. But that requires, there's a certain power in Sankirtan, a certain power in getting together to chant, getting together to read also. Certain
Yes.
power in that, yeah. And we have so many wonderful devotees in the world every day who give classes, and we're able to go on YouTube. If we don't like to read, we can hear, you know. So
Well,
these are wonderful,
on
yeah.
that note, actually, just wanted to share with you, with much inspiration, of course, from the BBT itself. But we do have now on the ministry website, Prabhu, we have the complete recordings of Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, along with translation purports in an audio format done by His Holiness Keshav Bharati Maharaj. And that's available for anybody. And it allows the devotees to actually go from a chapter and few verses to the next. You can track where you are. You can listen to it wherever you are. We're also offering some you know study books or study guides to summary study guides to go through the books to get an overall idea, again done by the inspiration of the BBT. So yes, there are resources like that. I want to spend a few more minutes, Prabhu, on the mood of reading. We find different devotees with different moods. There is also sometimes when one is reading, there's this whole notion of almost consuming, getting in as much here as possible to be able to verbatim repeat it, which is not bad, but repeat it. Could you share with us what should be the right mood we must have when we actually pick up these transcendental books? And how should we do it? And what are the lacunas that we must avoid, sincerely avoid, when we're reading Prabhupada's books?
Let me again very hastily reiterate my supreme disqualification on these kind of deep things. But what it reminds me of, there's a pastime with Bali Mardan Prabhu traveling with Srila Prabhupada. At 1:30 in the morning, Srila Prabhupada rings his bell. Bali Mardan Prabhu is in deep sleep. He wakes up, he goes to Srila Prabhupada, and he sees Prabhupada sitting in this dark room. And he's got a reading lamp on, on a small podium at 1:30 in the morning. And Srila Prabhupada is reading the Bhagavatam. So the servant is groggy-eyed, and Srila Prabhupada asks him to sit down. Now, you're asking the question, what is the mood? Well, in this pastime, I think that mood comes out very clearly. So the devotee sits down, Srila Prabhupada with a very crackling voice, his eyes swelled up with tears, he starts talking to Bali Mardan Prabhu about Prahlad Maharaj. He's reading this Bhagavatam, his Bhagavatam's in his hand, and the true meaning of being a Vaishnava. How Prahlad's only desire was to rescue the conditioned souls from this world of birth and death. And he was describing the compassion that a Vaishnava ought to have for the world. Yeah. And you could see, Bali Madan Prabhu could see in Srila Prabhupada's living example, here was the epitome, here was the embodiment, here was the living being who was carrying the hearts of all of these previous acharyas and teachers, and all of them have written books. But yet, 1:30 in the morning, he rings his bell to call his servant and tell him about the meaning of being a true Vaishnava. And his mission was and mood was to give Krishna to others. So what is the mood of reading? Is really want to give Krishna to others. Prabhupada translated every night. Why? He wanted to give Krishna to others. So we see that miracle on the streets of the world every day. The Sankirtan Yagya is like a fire that Srila Prabhupada lit. He was the master priest, he was the supreme priest who lit that Yagya. It's now burning. The world can feel its warmth through this transcendental knowledge. And the best evidence we have is many of us who have come. We've come through these books. So when you read these books, you naturally connect to Srila Prabhupada's mood. And the mood is, share what I have given you. Don't keep it for yourself. Take it out. And therefore, every devotee is an evangelistic Vaishnava. But if we don't read, we might get disconnected from that. We might get disconnected from the mood of preaching. Prabhupada, his whole mood was preaching. His books that we read, at least when I read them, I really feel inspired to make sure that our translations are up to date, that our planning is going on well, that the marathons are well organized. So that's the mood that I get when I read Srila Prabhupada's books.
Prabhu, you definitely have so much taste for reading. We come across devotees who even go to the extent of making a statement, and these are honest devotees, of course. They share this and they say, we don't have a taste for reading Prabhupada's books. And some of them even confidentially submit and say, actually, we feel bored when we read Prabhupada's books. They say we find the words repetitive, the message repetitive. Why do we face these kinds of emotions in our heart? What could be causing it? And what must we do to save ourselves from such a doomed state of mentality where we come to a point where we lose taste in what is actually going to nourish us every day?
Yeah, that's quite an interesting observation. I have never personally met somebody who, actually I've never met anybody who said something like that. Because this is divine charity. Divine charity means we share something very valuable. When that charitable gift is divine, can you imagine how valuable that is? So we know that we are dealing with Srila Prabhupada's heart because Srila Prabhupada said, the BBT is his heart. And he even said practically the books are the basis on which our movement stands. Without them, our preaching has no effect. So how would we preach if we are not connected to those books? It's not clear. In 1976, Srila Prabhupada wrote a letter to Tusta Krishna Swami and said that these books are the basis of our movement. That people appreciate us on account of our books is because of following the path chalked out by the exalted teachers. We are successful. So if somebody says, well, I'm reading and I'm not appreciating or I don't have the enthusiasm, then, as I said, I've never met such a devotee, but it's very possible that somebody might be inclined actually, this reminds me of something. I will just say it quickly. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had a devotee, he was a medical doctor who had taken sannyas. But he wanted to study the Shastra. But he didn't he wasn't very knowledgeable, but he's taken sannyas. So I forget the devotee's name, but Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said, you go and see such and such devotee and tell him that I asked you to go to him to learn the Shastra. So this devotee goes out and he finds this gardener, who's looking after Krishna's flowers and like that. And this devotee is startled when he hears the request. Guru Maharaj is asking you to come to me. I'm not a scholar. I don't know the Shastra. So this devotee is confused. The sannyasi is confused. So he goes back to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta and he says, but a certain devotee says that he's not a scholar and he's not able to teach me. And then Srila Bhaktisiddhanta said, go back to him again and insist. So he went back again to him. And this devotee said, he really makes a very honest statement. He says, all I'm doing is looking after Krishna's garden. From that I get some inspiration and I chant Hare Krishna. So when he went back and told Srila Bhaktisiddhanta that, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta said, he has understood. He has come to the end of all knowledge. So if somebody is engaged in service, in a sense, you and I would conclude that he has understood. But if somebody is preaching, he would have to study. But if somebody is, fully satisfied and, they're chanting Hare Krishna, that means they've understood the most detailed of devotional conclusions, right? So will every single person in ISKCON and every devotee every day wake up, put on their best effort to read? Is that a reasonable expectation? I don't know, actually. I don't know. But one would think, for preaching purposes, one would necessarily, or else how do you teach your children anything about Krishna if you don't know? And most certainly, ISKCON is renowned for its scholarliness. We have many scholarly devotees. So there will always be, like you get scholarly devotees, I guess you must also get devotees who may feel they don't need to read. They just got the holy name and prasad and sankirtan, and they're happy with that. That's also fine, I guess.
True.
Yeah.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you for sharing that perspective. Prabhu, what parting message would you like to give to the leaders in anticipation of the celebration of books are the basis, which we're trying to embark upon, and make Srila Prabhupada's books as the very foundation? Any parting words that you like to share with everyone, with our viewers and the leaders?
Yeah, I mean, the BBT is very committed to making sure that Srila Prabhupada's books are. We have the Bhaktivedanta archives. Everything
Yes.
Srila Prabhupada has said has now been almost, you can say, eternalized, digitalized. And the reason for that is many people will come after us. Like when you get a great mountain, if you're very close to a great mountain, very close, at the foot of that mountain, you won't appreciate the beauty of the mountain.
You can't see.
As you
Right.
go back and back and back, the beauty and the majestic, the great mountain becomes more appreciative. So Srila Prabhupada, I feel as time passes on, Srila Prabhupada will become more famous, will become more appreciated. And his mountain of books is what will present him in the world as one of the greatest persons who ever lived. So when we say that his books are the basis, it's exactly that. It's the basis of that mountain. It's the basis for ISKCON. It's the basis for every devotee's life. And it gives us confidence because there's no question, and I'm a very critical and cynical person. There is no question that I had honestly had that I couldn't find an answer in Srila Prabhupada's books. Now, that is the most unique thing, right? Even if you're a student of economics and you get the greatest professors of economics who write the greatest books, it's always very subjective and you won't find every answer in it. But spiritually speaking, in Srila Prabhupada's books, everything is there. When Prabhupada says everything is in my books, he actually literally means that. Everything is there. We were having a Bhagavatam class the other day about creation. And it's quite a complex topic, creation, all these different Siddhadaksaya, Vishnu, and Mahavishnu, and comparing that to other ideas of creation. And Srila Prabhupada's explanation, you can appreciate how intricate what Srila Prabhupada gave actually is. So you can start with the most basic, or you can end with the most complicated subject matters. Everything is in Srila Prabhupada's books. And that is my absolute conviction. I recall reading how Srila Prabhupada, when he started the BTG magazine in the early 1940s, Srila Prabhupada was like in a very poor state. He sometimes would miss breakfast. He had a couple of devotees in a kurata. Instead of riding sometimes, you'd hire a rickshaw if those needed to carry lots of paper, heavy rolls of paper. And he was convinced that somehow or the other, if I get these words onto this paper and get this paper into the hands of a conditioned soul, some magic is going to happen. So Srila Prabhupada, he demonstrated it, he did it, even when he was invited to Japan for the Congress of Cultivating the Human Spirit. He wrote a book for that occasion called The Light of the Bhagavata. Can you imagine? A manuscript tailored for this Japanese event. But he had no patrons. So he begged and beseeched various patrons, even the Prime Minister of India, please pay my fare to Japan. Can you imagine? How amazing is that? So where we are, we carry the little flame. Srila Prabhupada, he really struggled to give us these books. We have them our gratitude will first start by reading something every day. It takes me 12 minutes to 15 minutes to read a chapter of Bhagavad Gita, just the English translations. 12 to 15 minutes. So even if we are time constrained, and many of us may be and would be, but 15 or 20 minutes we can find for sure.
Yes, definitely, Prabhu. And with that with the inspiration that you've given us, I'm sure we'll be able to find more as time moves along. On this point about the mountain that you just talked about when we're so close, I'm reminded recently of what I read in Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Leela, in the section where Lord Gauranga is telling Lord Nityananda to go and preach in Bengal. And I was just trying to think how the society and the Vaishnava community has expanded from there on, right? And I was contemplating that at that point in time when devotees were increasing in Bengal and Odisha, how it must be feeling, how joyful it must be. But we come forward now 500 years, 540 years approximately, and we see how this movement is expanded. And we sort of feel, oh, it's big. But as you said, it's only a matter of time. Let another 1,000, 2,000 years go by. And when we are a little bit distant from this mountain, which has its very foundation, the words of Srila Prabhupada's instructions, we'll really be able to appreciate one day what we're part of. Prabhu, I am ever so grateful for your time, inspiration, insights,
Yes.
and so many personal experiences you've had. And most importantly, that as a leader, you're reading every day, you're guiding so many devotees and encouraging everyone around the world to do the same. Thank you so much for your time. And I hope that we'll have an opportunity to again speak to you on this topic, most important topic of Srila Prabhupada's transcendental literature and its proliferation around the world for the next 10,000 years.
Thank you, Tapan Mishra Prabhu. You are an inspiration. All the devotees of Prabhupada are an inspiration. So we borrow from their inspiration and we live each day by their inspiration. So whatever we could do to serve the course of Srila Prabhupada's books, it's like a wireless connection, right? If you have no data, you have no connection. So if you don't read, you kind of like disconnected from, you're disconnected from Prabhupada's, some aspect of his mercy. So thank you very much for organizing this very important conversation. And I really hope that we'd have an opportunity to have more conversations like this. All
I
glories to
look forward to
Prabhupada.
them. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna.